Techniques for better blending. Not a day goes by when someone's animation somewhere can't benefit from a better understanding of how to vary speed with the follow path object constraint. The follow path object constraint is typically put on some kind of mesh object, and a path or Bezier circle or curve is selected as the target for the object to follow. Following the curve and then adjusting the settings so that everything works out and your object goes the direction you want it to go tends to be easy enough, and then when you hit animate path and run the animation, you get a tiny little circle of something going around. When it comes time to change that animation, you take a look at what you have and nothing is there. Nothing is there because the animation exists as an active F-curve. Active F-curves don't take keyframes at all. They're baked in as movement, and there's nothing really that you can change about this animation. So people don't use these for anything significant. If you wanted to vary the speed of the object around a simple path like a circle, it would almost make more sense to take the object, not have it constrain with a path follow, and parent it, and then rotate the parent in a way that had it going slower and faster, simulating the object moving the way you wanted it to move. That only works if the path of your object is geometrically easy. Let's say, for example, you had something that was a little bit more complicated, and you knew there was an area for your object to go slower and an area for your object to go faster. You would create an object, and in this case we're just going to use a UV sphere that is knocked down to 3 segments, and I'll leave it at 12 rings and then a size of 0.1. I won't move it from the center, and the center is also where this cat head shaped curve has its origin. The curve, if it's filled in and beveled with a depth to show any sort of object in render mode, can be done so with full, or without the depth it's invisible and we just have the object traveling along that path. So we already know that we can right-click to select the object, go to the Constraints tab, and add Follow Path. We can select the path from the choices, we can follow the curve, and then adjust the settings so that our object is oriented the way we want it to look. If I hit Alt-A and run the animation, nothing happens because we haven't clicked Animate Path. And don't. That would be the way to do it wrong. What we want to do is control the offset of the object along the path. The offset is measured by the path's frames and evaluation time. It doesn't matter if it's 100 or 1000, but because our animation right now is 250 frames on the timeline, I'm going to make the frames for path animation 250 frames. One additional bit of information for the curve or the path is the resolution. In Preview, you can turn up the resolution, and any object that's using that curve as a path to follow will also take a better turn, though what that object is really paying attention to is the number of frames. These integers do make a big difference. These integers as offset include thousandths of an integer, so it's also able to take care of itself for smoothing out. But if you're visibly looking at the path, remember you can change the resolution so that you get a smoother path overall. When I right-click select the object and go back to the tab that shows the follow path information, I can scroll through the offset and confirm that the start and end point happen between an integer of 250 and a starting integer of 0. I'll put it at 0. I'll also make sure I'm at the beginning of my animation. I'll right-click that value for offset and insert a keyframe. I'll go to the end of my animation with Shift-right arrow, or clicking on this button at the bottom, and I'll put in 250 as a value for offset, right-click that field, and insert a keyframe there. Once my cursor is in the 3D view, I can hit Shift and F6 and get right to the graph editor. The letter N brings up and puts back the Properties panel on the right side. At the moment, my keyframes are selected. To see everything that's selected in a nice tidy view, I can hit the decimal on the number pad. This curve reveals that the animation starts out slowly at the offset point of 0 in the beginning of the animation. It accelerates and then slows down once the animation gets back to an offset of 250. Well, this betrays the start and end. It does nothing for slower and faster, but I think what I would like to do is have it a uniform linear motion. A lot of people may suggest that you take the extrapolation mode and move it to a linear extrapolation. Don't do that. Go into the interpolation mode for the keys that you have set and choose linear. There's a reason for this. We now have another hurdle. That other hurdle, because words aren't enough, I need colors. The other consideration is that we want our object to slow down in one location and speed up in another location. Right now its speed is uniform and still looks very mechanical, isn't helpful to a lot of animations. I can stop the animation and scrub through. When I get to the point where I want the object to get slower, I can press over the graph editor I on the keypad. I have a different set of choices for inserting a keyframe than if I'd selected I. If I'd selected inserting a keyframe with the right click over the offset field. When I press I over the graph editor, the correct choice for me is only selected channels. Now I'll scrub through the animation and get to the other side of where I want the speed of my object to change. I'll press I again. Now on the graph editor, A, B for shortcut keys, and I'll left click and drag over the two new keyframes. I have two new keyframes that essentially sandwich the area where I want things to go slower. What I'm looking at when I look at this animation in the graph editor is a representation of space-time. Space is the offset, a location in space. When? That's time, and time is indicated along the bottom. I can use frames, or I can use Control-T and see how it's evaluated in terms of seconds plus frames. There are 24 frames every second. So when I get to a 3-second moment, it is 3 plus no frames. As soon as I move, it's 2 plus 23 frames. That means the next frame is the 3rd second of the animation. I don't know what's most helpful to you, but I appreciated Control-T, helping me change the way I can see the display of time. Space is on the y-axis. We've set the evaluation frames of the curve, or the path, to 250. Its default is 100. I wanted it to be 250 in the beginning, just to match the 250 frames of the animation on the timeline. That 250 is also represented here along the y-axis. Therefore, I can identify space-time very easily using the graph editor. If I want an object to move through this amount of space slower, then I would stretch the distance between these two keyframes along the x-axis. That will add time to my animation, but that's okay. One of the best ways to do this is A, to make sure nothing is selected, choose the top of one of those two keyframes and use G and X so that you constrain any grabbing and movement to the x-axis. So I'm going to go 25 frames, adding 1 second to my animation. If I use the up arrow, it will jump to the next keyframe. That's where the graph editor really shines and comes in handy. It now tells me in the green box at the bottom that my animation could be 275 frames in length. I'll stretch this to 275 frames. And when I hit play, I go ahead and watch and wait and see. And now it has slowed down over the slow patch and then restored its speed after the keyframe and location for spacetime that I specified. There is a faster section. I want this to happen faster. So, same thing. I'll get to one point in my curve, in my path, where I want faster to begin. I'll press I and add a keyframe for the selected channels. I can just click and drag through the graph editor and find the endpoint. And if this gets to be too difficult, I can use my left and right arrow keys to go one frame at a time. I only selected channels. Now, I already know that I can compress these and make a more vertical orientation between those two keyframes, and I'll get faster action. So A to deselect everything, and what I've enjoyed doing is dragging a box select to get the topmost keyframe and everything above it. G and X, and I'll use the control key again and pull it in. I don't want it to just scream right along, but it looks like it's going to scream right along if I do it about a full second. Let's do it a full second. Now let's see what's happened. Shift left arrow, and my origin is at the bottom. I think I said it was at the top. Pardon me. Oh, that was fast. And now it's resumed its regular linear speed. And there's a nice slow patch. And, oh, it stalled. It stalled because we've changed the overall length of the animation. So I can use my up arrow, and it looks like I have inadvertently restored the animation back to 250 frames. That, in this example, is pure coincidence. That doesn't always happen, and it's okay if it doesn't always happen. This is now just the way we want it. We don't really want it to start here at the bottom, but we're satisfied with the slow and the fast. And so, in order to lock the slow and the fast in, we're going to do something a little more uncommon. We're going to take this animation, go into extrapolation mode, and we're going to make it cyclical. Every time we pass through a point, it will always observe the slower patch and the faster patch. Any changes that we make here will be reflected in the cyclical duplicates that are infinite. Let's make a change. I don't want this to be so rough. I want this to be more like Bezier. So I'll deselect everything and get my border select tool with the letter B. I'll left click and drag over almost everything, but not quite. I'd worked hard to create the linear from the end frame and the beginning frame. It was the first thing we did, was create a linear movement to create a constant velocity. That constant velocity is also reflected here in this long stretch. Although that constant velocity stretch is up and to the left, its slope is exactly the same as the initial linear velocity. So it doesn't really matter that it's up and to the left. What matters is its slope through time and space is the same. Excluding the final two keyframes and the very first keyframe, I'll now go into Key and change the interpolation mode. It is linear now. I'll change it to Bezier. This will change things just a little bit in the animation, but it will also take away some of the hard edge. Now it gradually slows down, gradually resumes, gradually, although fast, gradually gets faster and gradually resumes the initial velocity. If these seem too fast or too slow, you now have handles and curves to manipulate. I left out the second to last and last keyframe because although I didn't change this keyframe, it has changed. And this handle is something that can be grabbed and can be modified. But the change stops there and my linear velocity is allowed to continue. And that means that from the end of the loop back to the beginning of the loop, no one can really pinpoint that this is the beginning and the end. Now, if my animation requires that my object start at a different point on the path, normally I'm up a creek. But with this method, I'm in luck. Now that my indication of current time is at the beginning, I can select all the keyframes and press G and press X. This allows me to move this cyclical graph, the cyclical representation of the keyframes, and position my object anywhere I want as the first frame without disturbing the work that I've just done. Maybe what I would like is for this to start here. I'm looking here, of course. And now when I play the animation doesn't care where it is in the cycle. It just knows it's a cycle and it's copying some information, and it preserves the patches that are both slower, changing the speed, or faster, changing the speed. It's wonderful. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities for using path follow in my animations. So there is another question that you could ask. This is great. If I had a bus slowing down at a bus station and then speeding up away from that bus station in a city, that'd be fantastic. But what if I'd like to have more buses? I can go anywhere in the timeline, take a look at it, and create a duplicate, and that happens here in 3D view. Shift D and enter. Now I have a duplicate. When I look at the graph editor, I'm now looking at the keyframes that represent the duplicated object. I can press G and X and start that next object anywhere I want. And it will also mimic the changes in velocity. I'll put it here on the other side, and when I press Alt-A to start the animation, I'm now using path follow and nothing more than an object and its duplicate to create an animation that's very simple that looks non-clockwork mechanical, which is one of the big, horrible, telltale turnoffs for path follow as an animation. These two happen to be pretty evenly spread between, the center seems to always sort of stay between them. So maybe what I would like to do, just for the sake of example, is wherever I am on the timeline now, I'll hit Shift D and enter. and then G and X again, very callously. And I'll create a third one. There we go. Now two of the objects seem to be following each other, and collision is imminent. Oh, but no, they don't collide. It's fantastic. The caveat, when you have these all set and you've made your cyclical change, as long as you keep the start time and the end time the same, you can modify one of these to be a little different than the others. And so now, because that modification has taken place, the newest of my duplicate objects is obeying the change in that handle. So there is a collision taking place because they're no longer exactly the same for velocity. If I come out of this cycle, say I right-click select this keyframe and choose GX and move it out, all of the cycles take that change, and then I will eventually get the weird timing hiccup because I've broken out of the 250 frame range that was otherwise there. Let's see if I can pinpoint that. It should be the highlighted one. Oh yeah, a big jump. They just lurched over here. So time and space has been broken. So it's good practice to leave the first one and the last one alone. Make it cyclical, and then alter the keyframes on the inside. In order to adjust the keyframe on the inside, you can select that keyframe and then press R to rotate it. Or if you only want to change one of the handles, right-click select that handle and press G to grab it. Now this brings both handles. We can change the handle type with a shortcut letter V. And if you choose free, we can now change just that handle without affecting the other. And it backs up into traffic because it's an obnoxious driver. See, it's going, oh, all right, don't go slow. Anyhow, these are things we should all know a little something about, and I do hope you find some inspiration from what you've seen today. Blend on and take care.